Hi everyone, welcome back to a new video. So today's video is actually going to be a little bit of a controversial topic for some, or a little bit of a hot take type video. So we're going to be talking about the confusion between what you can do if you are a Vinted Pro Seller, and a lot of mistakes that I'm seeing pro sellers doing, or like misunderstandings that they're having, that is causing them to have their account restricted and banned. So if you're new here, my name is Gemma, and me and my fiance James run a reselling business called House of Jams, where we sell luxury and vintage items, and we kind of share our experiences on our journey of building our business. So the reason I thought this video would be really useful to have, or should I say to make, is because I've noticed on lots of Facebook posts, Reddit, just across the sort of internet in general, obviously there has been a big, increase, a big wave of people's Vinted accounts being restricted and banned for a whole host of reasons. And I've kind of spoken about those reasons in a couple of past videos. However, the one that I keep on seeing coming up quite a lot, which could be easily avoided if people were just aware, and I'm not just blaming it on Vinted sellers, it's also very misleading the way that Vinted are being about this as well, so I do want to point that out. I think they could do better, is what people think they can and can't do as a pro seller if they have a pro seller account. So I've been seeing a lot of people, saying that they have been flagged for having commercial activity, or selling too many brand new with tags items which Vinted think is commercial activity, and they are getting their account restricted and their account banned. And the confusion comes from is that Vinted is then telling them to then switch to a pro account. Okay, so they're saying, right, you're having these items taken down, your account's been restricted, we think you're selling commercially. And then they're being advised by Vinted to then switch to a pro account. So you would assume, it would make sense that you would assume, right, okay, if I switch to a pro account, then I'm going to be allowed to sell these things, no problem, it's fine. Why would Vinted suggest for me to do that if that wouldn't be the case? However, what is happening is that these people are going through the whole process of switching to a pro account, which is quite a long, drawn out process. And then they're going ahead, listing these items again, listing, their newer items or new with tags items or whatever it was that got them banned in the first place. And then Vinted is again flagging them, restricting them, taking down their listings, and it's almost as if they're not, it doesn't really matter if they're pro. Now, this is because even though you're a pro seller, you still can't sell high numbers of brand new with tags items. And I'm going to dive in a little bit more about this, looking at what Vinted's website actually says about this, because it's very misleading the way that Vinted are advising people to switch to a pro account, and they're not maybe highlighting, the fact that even if you switch to a pro account, I don't understand it actually. Like, why would they not just say, I don't understand why they're telling people to switch to a pro account when the activity that they're being flagged for, they wouldn't be allowed to do on a pro account anyway. I do think that is a massive mistake from Vinted's, part. It's definitely their fault that they're kind of saying this, because it is very misleading and it is very confusing. But let's have a closer look at what Vinted's policies and things actually say for pro sellers. Into the catalogue rules on Vinted's website, and obviously the first part is your policies for non-pro sellers. We want to skip down to policies for pro sellers. Now obviously there's a big list here of everything that you are allowed to sell and everything like that. Obviously your main prohibited items, which is, all the dangerous stuff, a lot of stuff to do with hygiene things. Yeah, I'm not going to go into that just now. However, if we go down here to section 4 where it says commercial activities, here is the section where it kind of outlines what you're allowed to do and not sell as a pro seller. So it says pro sellers are allowed to use Vinted as part of their professional activities. However, in addition to the above mentioned restrictions, pro sellers are required to only sell second-hand items and are not allowed to offer any type of service, not limited to but including listings such as renting can be ordered out of stock. So anything that you're doing like as a custom order, like made to measure, anything like that, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to offer a large number of brand new items, including items with tags. So second-hand items that are in new condition may be sold. So I'm assuming that would be things like if you're selling vintage stuff, maybe dead stock and things like that. But these have to be unique pieces sold by the pro seller. You're not allowed to offer resale items purchased in bulk or items sold as dropshipping products with a low resale value. And I've already mentioned before, we're not allowed to sell handmade stuff. That's no different than a non-pro seller, and you're not allowed to sell any cosmetic items or beauty devices, which again is very similar to a normal non-pro seller. So yeah, after having a closer look at that, it's very clear why people are getting quite confused, because obviously they're being told by Vinted, go pro seller, given the impression that the things that their account was being restricted for, they would then be allowed to do. However, it says in their, policies and stuff that you're not allowed to sell a large number of brand new items. So this is actually as well coming off the back of a comment that I had on a few videos ago, where someone was asking, it was actually like a comment that they were actually asking about relisting. So what had happened was that they'd listed, I think they'd said 17 items altogether that were all brand new, and they had these items taken down, and I think they did mention they were a pro seller, and basically they were asking, how do I go about relisting these items so that they're not going to get flagged? They were worried about the relisting side of it, and thinking about, I'm going to have to take new pictures and things like that. So I asked this, why did Vinted say they took them down? Was it because it was it was commercial activity, or what? Because obviously if you're listing a lot of new items all at the one time, they're not going to like that. So at this moment, I've not had a response back yet from that person, but I've got a funny feeling that's probably why those listings were taken down. So even if they take new pictures, even if they do things to change the listing and make it better, it's probably still going to flag because it's a lot of brand new items all at the one time. So I've got to say though, this is where my sort of hot take and my sort of a little bit of a controversial opinion comes in. There's a bit of me that actually quite likes that Vinted does this, and I'll explain why before anybody comes for me. As a seller, we sell things obviously on Vinted. However, I also am very aware of things that are going on the likes of Etsy from other businesses that are doing things like that. And if anybody's shopped on Etsy, you'll have noticed that it's very difficult now to find unique, genuinely handmade items, and that's what Etsy was kind of built for. It's all full of rubbish that's been bought from the likes of Temu, AliExpress. People have bulk bought big, loads of things and are selling them off individually. They're not well made, they're quite cheap. They're not obviously probably making a very big profit margin as well, but because they're able to sell it, in large volume, they're making money. And there is a lot of controversy about debate whether the things that are being sold are actually handmade. There's a lot of Etsy sellers that have been found out to be untruthful about this. There's a whole, it's just something that you're kind of having to wade through all the rubbish before you can find the good items. So I do feel that as Vinted are being extremely strict about this, it's stopping Vinted from becoming what Etsy has become, and not just Etsy, other platforms as well, even sometimes the likes of Amazon and even eBay and stuff like that. It's quite tricky to sometimes wade through all the rubbish before you actually get what you're looking for, depending on what it is you're trying to buy. So I do feel as a small business, and people that you're competing against a lot of different sellers and things like that, it's one less, I suppose, thing that you're not competing against. And because I do feel if Vinted was to allow people to drop ship stuff and allow people to buy massive bulk lots of cheaply made items, I do feel sellers who are genuine sellers who are selling their own secondhand stuff, or the ones that are pro sellers that are selling secondhand items and things, I do think it would really affect us in a negative way. And it would be really, especially because the app, it's not as big as the likes of eBay, it's not as big as Etsy, I think it's still quite a smaller app. I think it's not long just went to the US, so I just feel right now anyway, it's not the place to sell drop shipped stuff. It's not I wouldn't even say it's not like Etsy's not the place for it either, but it's not, it's not Shein, it's not Temu, it's not AliExpress, and I do feel that's maybe the kind of people that are trying to target. And unfortunately, genuine sellers who are do have just a load of brand new stuff that they're wanting to sell, whether it's unwanted presents, things that don't fit, even just small businesses who've maybe bought a few things that are brand new to sell on, we're getting caught in the crosshairs. And it's just, it's a little bit of a tricky one, because overall, I do, think it's really frustrating that Vinted are, targeting these people and are sort of punishing them. And I do think a lot of it is coming down to how they are sharing the information, how they are wording it. The fact that they are taking these items down, they're not telling them, don't list them again. They're just directing them to become a pro seller. I really don't know why they're telling people to become pro sellers if they know fine well that the things that you're doing, you're still not allowed to do as a pro seller. It doesn't make any sense. And they're just kind of hoping or relying on people obviously wading through all the conditions and everything, which I know you're meant to do. But at the end of the day, it is very misleading because, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, why would Vinted tell you to then sign up to a pro account if what you're doing is not allowed even on a pro account? So I just want you to kind of bring that to people's attention, because I do feel like after what I've kind of seen in a lot of Facebook discussions and Reddit discussions and things, it does seem like the vast majority of people that are turning to a pro account don't know this. And then they're getting their accounts restricted, and then they're getting, their accounts banned. They're not able to sell things. They're not able to make an income. And it's a shame. And it's just like, I just think that it's one of those things that Vinted could definitely do better. But hopefully people will see this video and then we'll go and check the conditions themselves and just make sure that, they're keeping themselves right, so that they're not getting their account banned or anything. So what obviously can we do about this as sellers? So what I would probably say is, if you are someone who wants to sell quite a lot of brand new items, or you've been flagged on Vinted for commercially selling, I know it's maybe not the best thing to hear, but I would probably think about changing platforms. I know personally ourselves, we have started to focus a lot more on eBay and on our own website. Obviously, starting your own website is a whole massive job. I mean, obviously, I know that. And right now we're not really getting much traffic to our website, and that's totally fine. However, there are other platforms that you can use, as I said, the likes of eBay and things like that. I mean, obviously, it just depends on if you think it's worth it or not. If you've built up quite a good, lot of reviews and things on Vinted, and you're doing really well on Vinted, you're making a lot of money on Vinted, to then try and start a new platform, if you've never tried eBay before, can be very daunting. And I totally understand that. If you maybe dabbled in it a little bit and, you've sort of seen a little bit of success, it might be worth putting a little bit more time in there. But obviously, it's completely up to everybody what they decide to do. The only thing I would say is that if you are, a reseller, or if you're somebody who has Vinted, you sell things on there for your business, you might have to be very careful about what you're listing, how many things you're listing, what you're naming them, what you're labeling them as, and all that kind of stuff. So, obviously that's everybody's decision to try and decide what's more worth it. Is it more worth it just having to be super careful if you're using Vinted and just knowing that any time they could flag your account? Or is it going to be worth your time starting a new platform, or continuing to build a new platform if you've already started? So I think it's just one of those things that you have to decide, what's best for you and your business. As I said, we're, concentrating a bit more on eBay, because on eBay you are allowed to sell, a lot more freely with things. You are allowed to relist things as well, which is really good. You don't get flagged for taking an item down and relisting it. They actually encourage you to relist items, so that's a massive positive as well. And then obviously, if you are using your own website, you can do what you like. So it's just one of those things, I suppose, that we all need to kind of decide on what is best for our own business. And then another thing I kind of wanted to point out as well, and this was something that actually put us off originally from moving from Vinted to eBay, because we started with Vinted, like probably a lot of other people who sell vintage things and stuff, was when you list things on eBay, you don't always get the initial interaction with your items. And I do think this is where Vinted has been very clever and very, they've used, I suppose, similar strategies to the likes of social media apps. So obviously, I don't know if you do this, or if you've ever done this in the past, when you list an item on Vinted, especially if it's like a busy time, like a Sunday night or something, you list your item, it is quite satisfying seeing how many views you've had and how many likes you've had. Now, those views and those likes don't mean anything unless they convert to a sale. However, I don't think any of us can deny that seeing that your item has had, say, 500, views and 200 likes is quite a dopamine hit. which is where it's very similar to Instagram, it's very similar to social media. And whereas on eBay, we've sold, I would probably say recently, we've sold more items on eBay than we have on Vinted. But if I was to look at my views of our items on Vinted, sorry, not Vinted, if I was to look at our views of our items on eBay, the views per item are so much more lower. Like, we've sold things that have maybe had 3 views, or we've sold things, you know, maybe a popular item on eBay will be an item that's had 20 views and maybe a couple of likes. So that's one thing I just wanted to point out, that if you do decide to move over to eBay, it's a completely different platform than Vinted. Do not expect as much engagement, like a social media kind of thing, because obviously eBay and Vinted work very differently. Vinted, there's almost like a bit of a For You page on Vinted when you do go on the app. You know, it's all been sort of catered to your sort of preferences, to things you've searched for in the past, to things that you've bought, to things you like. Whereas eBay, it does that a little bit, but you kind of have to actually search for something. And then I think obviously you do have the app, but it's a bit clunky. I feel like it's not as user-friendly as Vinted. So Vinted has been very clever with taking things from social media to keep people on the app, to keep people using them, to keep people selling on there, and obviously to keep people buying on there. It's just, it is more of a pleasant experience. But if you can get past that, and if you can sort of don't compare eBay to Vinted, I do think if, you know, you are a commercial seller, or you're somebody who wants to make it into a business, it would be a really good, you know, option, I would say. So if you found this video useful or interesting, make sure and subscribe and turn on the notification bell for any of our future videos, and I'll see you in our next one. Bye!